I have spent nearly 3,000 hours across all Atlus games, whether it's playing them or modding them. Out of all of them, you could say Persona 3 is my favorite, but Persona 4 Golden is the most important. It was my first Megaten title, so I got to appreciate it both as a completely new player and then later on as a much more experienced one. Having spent so much time around this series, I know the games like the back of my hand, so with the news of Persona 4 Revival, I'm not only excited to re-experience my first Atlus game again, but also to take part in discussion while almost nothing is known about it. Based on my experience with the game, and also what we've seen from Reload, here's what I think Persona 4 Revival needs to be perfect. There is absolutely no way I wouldn't start with the inclusion of Aika. Aika Nakamura is the daughter of the Chinese restaurant's owner from the Inaba shopping district. She's an anime-only character who became unexpectedly popular, and as a result could not be added to Persona 4 Golden, instead being only referenced when visiting the restaurant. Every time, you miss her by just a few moments, which becomes a running gag. There are so many variations of this dialogue in the game that it could genuinely be a social link by itself. While it's obviously not confirmed, the Revival trailer shows a bike parked at the restaurant's entrance, and it's extremely low poly. It doesn't mean much by itself, but there are other, much higher quality bike models in the same scene, so one could theorize that it's a placeholder for the scooter she rides in the anime. My ideal inclusion for Aika would be a social link, and while there are some people who would like her to replace the fox, I would rather have her be an addition. Since the Sun and Strength Arcana social links in the game already require second playthroughs to experience both sides, she could be the third social link of this kind, allowing an inclusion without making up a fake major arcana like Royal did. She could also be included through the linked episode feature that was introduced with Reload. However they do it, her inclusion is my #1 wish for Revival. On my first Golden playthrough, I wasted entire weeks visiting the restaurant over and over, trying different things in hopes she was in the game, so I would feel vindicated seeing her in the remake. I still want her to take a significant amount of visits before finally showing up though. It would keep the nod to the original and finally give me the payoff I've been wanting for years. I want bosses to lose their immunity to critical hits. This may sound like a really weird request, especially after Reload. After all, physical is one of the main reasons the game balance in modern Persona games is so broken. The issue generally lies in the rates being pretty high, but also base powers being higher than any magic skill in the game by default. Reload added fizz and crit rate boosts, which widened the gap even harder, but when we look at Persona 4, magic is actually not that bad. In fact, when you take into account the many bosses that are immune to critical hits, the lack of physical boosts, and the bosses that have secret resistances to fizz, the balance isn't so bad. Bosses being immune to crits is one of those things that feel like an attempt to fix fizz being too strong, but it ends up reducing your options. The two big fizz users in the party are Chie and Kanji, with Kanji being based around raw consistent high damage, and Chie having slightly weaker physical but much higher crit rates and crit buffs. Chie is a powerhouse when the enemy can actually be critically hit, but she's constantly punished due to enemy immunity. For Revival, you can use Reload as an example. Junpei is much stronger than Akihiko because of his critical consistency and the damage bonus being much higher than buff amps, but if every enemy was immune to critical hits, Akihiko and Aigis would end up taking the edge over him. By making bosses critable while taking fizz and magic balance into account, Chie and potentially also Yosuke would have a stronger role rather than Kanji being the go-to every single time. Elemental weapons are one of the most fun features from the original Persona 3, and I was quite happy to see them return in Reload. Sadly, these never came back in any other Persona game. Giving characters weapons with a different element gives you more freedom in what party you take to dungeons, and for characters like Naoto, who has many elements but no boosts, some of her many pistols could have the element boosts included, letting you build her to specialize into a specific element to fit alongside your other party members. I want vows and pins to return. Those are the accessories that give 10 to 50% boosts either in damage or defense to an element. Contrary to popular belief, they actually stack with boost and amp, but they do cap out. You can think of it as stacking with either boost or amp, but not both because Boost plus Amp already hits the limit. These accessories are great because they allow a lot of flexibility in how you set up your party. In the early game, they can completely shake up which of your party members is the strongest, and in the late game, they can be used as a passive replacement which then frees up a skill slot. It's one of those things that gives a little bit of party build freedom, but also adds an element of moderate randomness in your playthrough. It can sometimes be a really nice motivator for removing someone off the bench, and using everyone equally is always pretty fun. It's relatively safe to assume Revival is going to have something similar to Theurgy or Showtime. Persona 4 Golden had fusion spells which could randomly occur after an all-out attack, but they were pretty weak. Their element was almighty, and they were all the same. There were only 3 based on very strict character pairs, which meant a lot of players would go through the game without even seeing some of them. For Revival, having these combo skills take the place of Theurgy could be pretty interesting, but there should obviously be a few changes to make it work. One of the big gripes I had with Theurgy was that it was very easy to passively charge it while just setting up buffs and stalling, and then immediately pulling the super move, doing so much damage that you one-shot the enemy. It basically makes regular skills a lot less meaningful, turning Theurgy into your main viable offensive option, especially since all Theurgys ignore enemy resistances, so you could always just use the stronger ones without having to worry about anything. I would want them to exist alongside regular skills and not replace them by being too strong. There's a few ways to achieve that, such as adjusting the damage formula, removing the affinity piercing, making the gauge be shared among the whole team rather than be on a per member basis, adding some cooldowns, and reducing the base damage, but as a trade-off, having special conditions that increase it back. Something that could be really cool is reintroducing dual element fusion spells. For example, Yukiko and Chie's attack would have both fire and ice properties, and it would be affected by the relevant boosts to those elements. And if the enemy is weak to both elements, the bonus damage would be multiplied twice. However, if the enemy nulls one of them, the attack would do 0 damage. For this to work, the game would need a lot more than just the 3 from Golden. For the protagonist, having fusion spells with 2 personas is very unique to Persona 3's identity, so I don't think it should be in Revival. Instead, they could go the Royal Showtime route and have the protagonist have paired attacks with party members, and if you unlocked them through the social link system, I think it would fit Persona 4 pretty well. Before Baton Pass, Persona 4 had follow-ups. When downing an enemy, party members would sometimes ask to act, which would lead into an attack with the character's weapon element. Usually, they are guaranteed crits, but some of them have small differences. For example, Yukiko will dizzy the enemy, Kanji will hit 2 random enemies, and Chie has Galactic Punt, which is an insta-kill. Persona 5 also has these follow-ups, but they're very rare, and Reload removed them entirely. I want to see them return to Revival, but with a little bit more variety in each party member's effects, such as debuffs or ailments or something of the sort, since the addition of Baton Pass and Shift already makes follow-ups a little bit less useful. Reload gives me the impression that they wanted to fix some of Persona 5's balance issues. One of the big changes was removing Baton Pass's boosts, traits, and technical damage. In Persona 5 Royal, the more Baton Passes you did in one turn, the more damage and healing you'd be able to get, and you could also boost it even higher with the darts minigame. You could also boost technical damage the same way. Reload did away with tech completely, turned traits into passive skills, and removed all Baton Pass boosts, also turning weaker versions of them into passives. I can understand the intent behind these changes, but the end result was pretty undesirable. Technical was probably seen in a bad light because of Merciless tripling its damage, but at normal damage rates, it was a pretty good option that made ailments more useful, even if Sleep, Freeze, and Shock ended up being the only good ones to use. Traits and Baton Pass were fun ways to reward the player for using mechanics in a smart way, meaning the fusion system, the one more system, and also the calendar system because of how you upgraded them. Removing them would have been one thing, but turning them into passives ended up having the opposite effect because they became stackable and went way too far out of control, since you could easily build them all up using skill cards as well. That's not to mention the fact that outside of the protagonist, only male characters have access to Shift Amp, leaving already weaker characters like Yukari and Mitsuru in the dust. For Revival, if Atlus is going to incorporate mechanics from Persona 5, I want them to really go all the way rather than only implementing it halfway. Building different personas around their traits and chaining Baton Passes or hitting technical combos is fun. Because there are no elemental ailments in Persona 4, they could instead use the game's different ailments as primers, and the elements as technical detonators that deal the extra damage, resulting in more build and party composition variety. I don't have a clue why Reload decided to go back and remove this, but SMT5 and Soul Hackers 2's in-depth compendium search are some of the best features added to Megaten ever. SMT5 allows you to reverse compendium search, seeing all the possible fusions you can make based on your registered demons, and Soul Hackers 2 lets you not only filter based on element, demon type, level, and other properties, but it also makes it really convenient to plan ahead for what you're going to want to fuse later on in the game. Revival should have these features because it's just a convenient way to scan the entire compendium for recipes without having to use external resources. I also want the Velvet Room to offer a little bit more. Persona 5 Royal does plenty, but Reload didn't really offer much. There is technically itemization in the form of hard items, but it was pretty cumbersome to check which persona corresponded to which item. And for stats, there was Incense, but Royal's method of putting a persona in stasis for a few days felt a lot better than just farming money to buy a bunch of cards. Persona 4's equipment is in a pretty weird spot. A lot of it has strange progression where effects in late game are weaker than earlier ones, and a lot of stuff is locked behind selling materials to Daidara, which is not only slightly grindy but also random, because it's based on which shadows you encounter in battle. It's rarely worth it though, because most good stuff is found in locked chests, minus a few exceptions. I like the idea of providing materials to Daidara to gain new options, but I would probably prefer it if the materials were used to customize and upgrade equipment similar to model guns in P5, rather than being used to unlock entirely new equipment that's worthless by the time you even unlock it. I also want the artisans' weapons to be more meaningful. If you didn't know about this, I don't blame you, because the game doesn't really tell you about it. I myself didn't know until my 4th playthrough. Certain weapons can be taken to this NPC in the school halls, and he'll trade them for special weapons. These are just cosmetic, but it would be cool if you could get small upgrades off of these trades as well. Golden also has the Shiroku Pub, which sells weapons in exchange for certain gemstones. These can be obtained by trading with the lady in white at the shrine, and I can't really remember the last time I even bothered to get anything from there, considering how the only time I do fishing is for the Guardian, at which point anything I could get from trading isn't really as useful anymore. There's the 50% XP weapons, but you can also get 2 50% armors from quest rewards around the same time, so even that doesn't really appeal to me. I like the idea of the Shiroku Pub, similar to how P3 has the police station and the antique shop, but in Persona 4, neither of the two are ever really good other than a few niche buys. Basically, what I'm saying is I like having different and meaningful options for buying equipment, and I'd like to see it in Revival. I want hard to actually mean hard. This is Persona 4, so I'm not going to be as demanding difficulty-wise compared to Persona 3. However, I would like it if Rakukaja wasn't enough to make you virtually undefeatable. Metaphor's difficulty values are pretty good when it comes to damage taken and dealt, and also level scaling. Not having your damage too reduced on hard, but taking significantly more is pretty good, and I like that Metaphor is also sharper at increasing damage taken for the first few levels of difference, but at larger differences the effect isn't as strong, so the game can stay challenging but not snowball into unfair territory if you're too underleveled. P4G has my favorite shuffle time out of every Persona game. It's always really satisfying to balance which cards you take and discard to sweep them all for the bonus effect. Sometimes I get lucky and carry the sweep bonus for the entire dungeon, and it always feels really nice. I want Revival to keep this system, and I would be pretty sad to see it not be included. But it's true that the system is not without issues. Yeah, there's the skill cards like in every other Persona game, but the big problem cards are Magician, Emperor, and the other stat cards. P4G has a reputation for being pretty grindy on very hard, but what a lot of people don't know is that if you just keep Izanagi with you the whole time, just from shuffle time alone, by the time you're at Naoto's dungeon, you should already have a persona with more stats than some of the game's level 99 personas. And with Magician cards, most Fizz skills eventually lead into God's Hand, which I shouldn't have to explain why that's a big deal. With enough luck, you'll have Izanagi with God's Hand and the AoE versions of the game's best buffs as early as Rise's dungeon, which is just as broken, if not worse, than some DLC personas in P5 and P3R. I don't really have a problem with the game letting you keep the same persona for a long time, as long as it's never outright better than fusing. So I'd want the sweep bonus system to stay, but the cards you get to be a little bit more tame, so your equipped persona doesn't go absolutely crazy right at the early game. Revival is the perfect opportunity to introduce new areas to explore, but of course, Inaba is a relatively small place, so we have to be mindful of that. Thankfully, Persona 4 already has the perfect solution to this. I think if Atlus wants to add new areas to the game, expanding Okina City is the way to go. The game currently only has 3 shops there, and they're rarely ever even used. I think working on that would be good, especially when you consider how a lot of shops in Royal were condensed down into shuffle time effects in Reload, which was functional, but honestly a little bit boring and grindy. There is a lot of dialogue buried under Hangout events on Sundays and also at night, ranging from just nice moments to outright referencing things currently going on in the main story. It's a very nice touch that often gets missed, especially if you're one of those who uses guides to get perfect runs. One change I think could make social link interactions better is changing rank ups from a reset system to a rollover system. The way social links currently work is each rank has a score meter, and when that meter is full, the next major interaction is a rank up with the meter going back to 0. That means any side interaction you do while the character is already ready to rank up is useless because rank ups put you back at 0. With a rollover system, every point you get would contribute towards future ranks as well, so it would never be wasteful to do something you want with a character. You might be thinking of Metaphor Refantagio's system of just ranking up characters up no matter what, but I personally think this is a really bad solution for Persona. Because the calendar is almost 3 times as long, you'd not only run out of content way earlier, leaving you with nothing, but side hangouts would also have no real gameplay reason to exist. For a game like Metaphor, this is fine, but Persona is specifically designed around social interactions, so removing systems like affinity scoring and social link reversal is pretty detrimental to the game's themes at its core. This one's more of a fan service thing than an actual feature, but I want to be able to actually roam Iwatodai and interact with its shops for the 3 days you spend there. Revival is already using a lot of Reload's assets in its maps, so it wouldn't really be anything crazy to just port the map over and let us explore. Reload had a Ryoji linked episode during the Kyoto trip, so there could maybe be some optional interactions in Iwatodai as well. Since both first and second years go to Iwatodai for the class trip, this is a perfect opportunity to add a linked episode for Aika as well. I also want to be able to actually enter and shop at Junes. It's practically a landmark in Inaba, but you never really go past the entrance and the food court in gameplay. I've always imagined the grocery department could be used to buy ingredients for meals that you could cook for your social links, and other departments could sell things like room decorations and other similar things. I don't think buying weapons and general consumables should be a thing because the shopping district also exists, but I'd be happy just having access to the Junes interior. The Fox Social Link is one I've often seen people want replaced because of its simple and time-consuming quests, but I've always really liked the idea of a quest line that's centered around you helping the many people of Inaba. I think turning the generic quest NPC dialogue into full cutscenes with a conclusion that shows the impact of what you did would cement the Fox as one of the best unique stories in the game. I want Revival to retain organic hangout invitations. Reload did away with them by just having everyone text you, but there's something really special about your friends coming up to you in class and ask to hang out, and calling you in the morning as well. It's a small thing, but I'd be really happy to see it, even if you can still delay responding until later like you could in Persona 5. I definitely think some of the party member movesets need a little tweaking, but nothing too serious. To avoid getting into too much of a balanced debate, since that's not really the point of this video, I'll just say I think Persona 4 was for the most part fine, with Naoto needing a little something in the support department, and Yosuke probably benefiting from some changes as well. With the help of Brawler from the Persona 4 Fog Restoration mod, we did make some skill set change drafts for Golden and some other changes, like making Dragon Hustle not have the Tsukukaja effect so Chie could pair well with Yosuke's Youthful Wind. A common suggestion is to make Naoto spec into Kouha and Eiha from Persona 5 and Reload, but I don't really agree, which brings me to my next point. I don't really want Light and Dark to have regular damage spells. The reasoning is honestly pretty simple. It dilutes the uniqueness of those two elements, and it doesn't really add anything new to the table, because Persona 4 magic is just elemental. For Reload, there was a fair justification, because magic spells fit into 3 different categories. There's the cheap elements, wind and fire, ailment elements, ice and electricity, which cost a bit more but have ailment chance, and power elements, light and dark, costing more but also doing more damage than normal. There was also a larger selection of party members, with 2 being specifically designed around light and darkness. Funnily enough, because of physical, Theurgy, and certain bosses just being insta-killable, even in Reload, Kouha and Eiha don't really end up adding much of a buff for Ken and Koromaru. For Naoto, it would really dilute her build. What makes Naoto special is the fact that she can pick one of her many elements, boost it with accessories, remove the rest, and fit into any party composition that way. If she had more support, probably debuffs, she'd be a lot more versatile in a way that is more meaningful than just slapping 2 more elements onto her. Revival also needs to do away with hidden resistances. You might not even be aware of this, but the analysis screen has been lying to you. A lot of bosses in Persona, and especially Persona 4, take greatly reduced, or sometimes increased damage to certain elements, but you are never told about it at all. If the game wants to have more gradual resistances to make battles more unique, then Risei should be able to point them out in the affinity screen. Fuka and Futaba can call out secret vulnerabilities through navigator lines, but have you ever noticed them? The investigation segments before dungeons make sense thematically, but their execution is pretty lackluster. The game does give plenty of context clues, but in some cases they're contradicting the actual solution, or have other unclear requirements like having to wait a few days, or having to leave the area and re-enter it. I don't want them removed, and I also don't want them to put waypoints everywhere. I want a clear middle ground where these segments get a little bit of touching up. Persona 4 has quests, similar to Elizabeth's requests in Persona 3. I like these a lot in theory because the idea of helping classmates and townspeople with their troubles is pretty cool for P4, but unfortunately, a lot of these quests boil down to not only farming enemies at random, but also doing so in previous dungeons. I wouldn't have too much of a problem with this if it only required you to go back once at most, because you have to replay them anyway for the optional bosses each dungeon has at the final floor, and it's a good opportunity to catch up party member levels, but sometimes quests are paced in such a way that you're required to visit dungeons several times over, which is not only a bit of a slog, but doesn't even give you much of a benefit either, since the enemies you're fighting are also very low level. For Revival, I'd want quests to have their pacing and unlock date changed at the least, so there's quests to clear in the currently active dungeon, and also so repeat run-throughs are one at most. I think Persona 4 handled rainy days very well. When it rains, everything stops, including the music. The atmosphere is perfect. I know Color Your Night was a great success, but I don't want Revival to add the rainy day music under any circumstance. A sunset theme for after school, or a summer theme for the really hot days that also don't have music would be much preferable. I also wouldn't want them to make all social links available during the rain, but I do think more weather-based bonuses would be a really nice addition. Persona 4 has the Beef Bowl challenge during rainy days, as well as stat bonuses in the library and when reading books at home. More similar effects, both positive and negative, could be nice, like certain skills having extra effects when it's raining, or modifiers like Persona 5's flu season and Metaphor Refantagio's inclement weather. Skills like Rainy Death sound like they'd benefit from rain bonuses so much that even the Megaten wiki thinks so. So it's not real? But I don't blame them. After not touching the game for such a long time, I also kinda convinced myself it was the case. For someone playing blind or casually, these chance effects could add a little variety and influence the decision process of what to do on any given calendar day. Visually, the game's teaser seems to be showing a summer scene, well, ignoring the clearly placeholder character model. But one detail I noticed is how there are quite a few puddles on the road. Given how P4 does have a few days where it rains in the morning, but it's back to sunny by the time you gain control of the protagonist, it could be that Revival will take that into account and have rain puddles on those kinds of days. That kind of attention to detail would be really nice, so I hope they actually do implement that. This one's confirmed, and I'm really happy about it. Since before even Reload, I've always wanted to see more of the areas you spend most of your time in these games. There's so much you don't see, and a remake is the perfect opportunity to have these areas revisited. Having a full 360-degree camera lets you see more, and I'm really excited to see these areas I've spent so much time in from a different viewpoint. The Culprit Dungeon has a pretty annoying quirk because of how the original PS2 game worked, where if you cleared it any day before the deadline, the game would immediately time skip to the ending, or the third semester content if it was unlocked. Even worse, a lot of people who are aware of this skip will do the dungeon on the 23rd, which is the last day, not knowing that doing this will also skip past the game's Christmas date events. To actually see everything, you have to end the dungeon 2 days before the deadline, no earlier, no later. Hopefully, Revival will either not have such a time skip, or at the very least, make it a requirement to fight the culprit on the 22nd of December. It's disappointing, but fair, that Reload couldn't include the month of February and Valentine's Day, or White Day for obvious reasons. For Persona 4, however, after February 15th, we see a bunch of scenes of the party cramming in as much time together as they can, including White Day, before the protagonist leaves Inaba. At the risk of dragging out the pacing of the game just a little bit more, I have the very selfish request of really wanting these to be actual scenes. The slideshow in P4 shows the actual dates things happen, so I can only assume they were planned at some point but cut in the final game for pacing reasons, and Revival is the perfect opportunity to put it it back in just as a little extra. Golden sometimes catches heat for removing and changing certain elements of the game's art style, and it's true that Golden in general does have less effects, primarily fog. A lot of scenes are pretty much downgrades, but as mods have shown, even on the Vita itself, these changes were never about the game's engine or hardware limitations. Atlus, for some reason or another, decided the game looked better on the Vita without these effects, and that persisted over to the PC version. For the most part, I do agree that the PS2 game looks better, but there are also plenty of areas where I like Golden's look more, usually where the scene is meant to be bright and colorful. Revival's trailer got a lot of criticism for its use of a strong blue filter in the shopping district and the lack of fog, but I think those people aren't really remembering the game properly. Having fog everywhere at all times is not what Persona 4 is about. There are plenty of sunny days even in the original game, and fog is supposed to alternate between reality and the TV world. If there's strong fog, that means something bad is about to happen, so it shouldn't always be foggy. As for the blue filter, yeah, it's a little strong, but it's being blown way out of proportion in my opinion. It's clearly not used throughout the entire game, not even in outside sunny scenarios. The trailer shows this, and the trailer was also clearly going for a certain colorful, nostalgic summer aesthetic, and honestly, I think Revival looks pretty good so far, especially if what we're seeing is unfinished content. I think it's safe to assume that there will be more fog effects than in Golden, but that game's already cemented itself as part of Persona 4's identity too, so I would expect them to make something that follows both games artistically. I don't think Revival needs this at all, but just like with Reload, where I do think it did need it, I would be perfectly fine with a new route or ending added to the game. In my opinion, I think the game should preserve the original story as much as possible, with no changes or rewriting to anything, with anything different being entirely focused on additions. I want to play this game because I really like Persona 4, so I'd still want it to be recognizable as Persona 4. But of course, with it being a new game in its own way, I'm also open to seeing new things while keeping the old mostly untouched. The option to see what social links can be ranked up from the minimap is pretty good quality of life, but I would prefer it if the game hid the characters that you hadn't started yet from the UI. One of the coolest things about playing P4 blind is how new social links are unmarked and you have to find them by chance, seeking activities out and stumbling into them. Not knowing where a bond can start makes the game feel bigger, like everything you could do could potentially be a new social link, and it's exactly for that reason that people back in the day thought that Aika could be in the game. Without a marker, you'd know right away that there's really no reason to be there. Some small changes or additions worth mentioning are having some more options for customizing the player's room beyond just figures. It would be pretty nice. I don't think the game needs it, nor do I think it will, but having more than just one physical element would be pretty cool. Not as important as it was in Persona 3, but having the option to use proper tactics would be cool for fans of that mechanic. I could rant about this for hours, but long story short, it's been bugged in every Persona game since P4 on PS2, including Reload. Having all social link events voiced like in Reload is pretty cool, assuming it doesn't take resources away from adding new stuff. I'm not too opposed to this addition, but I don't think XP share belongs in Persona 4. A catch-up mechanic like Reload's clock would be much better. But if they do add that, remove the 13 level cap. That's just stupid. And lastly, while I understand a lot of people want this game's dungeons to be turned into Persona 5 style palaces, I don't really think that they should do this. I'm definitely fine with more visual changes, maybe even unique floors, but I want Revival to preserve its dungeon crawling components rather than just fill it with puzzles. They're fun the first time, but pretty bothersome to go through in replays. The game would also need a lot of changes if they removed random floors, which is the whole reason Mementos existed in Persona 5 to begin with. So these are the things I would love to see in Persona 4 Revival. Obviously, when more news come out and we get to see more, my opinions might change and I might even come up with new things because of it. I'm sure there's plenty of things I didn't mention here. They're either obvious, I forgot, or I just didn't think they were worth talking about. Just like with Reload, I am extremely excited to re-experience Persona 4 as if it were the first time again. Even with all the criticisms I bring up, and yes, I'm aware that there's a lot, I'm always happy to play anything Atlus puts out. With very little news about the game still, all we can do is wait. If there's anything you want to see in Revival, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, see you on the next one.